The rain fell in relentless sheets upon Thornhaven Manor as Lord Adrian Blackwell descended the stone steps into the wine cellar. A candle flickered in his grasp, casting dancing shadows upon the ancient walls. He had come seeking a particular vintage, something to dull the sharp edges of grief that refused to soften even after 3 years of his wife's passing. The cellar stretched deep beneath the manor house, its vaulted ceilings bearing the weight of 5 centuries. Adrian moved past dusty racks of forgotten bottles, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. It was here, in this place of darkness and silence, that he sought refuge from the world above, from the pitying glances of servants and the concerned letters from family urging him to rejoin society. He reached for a bottle, his fingers brushing the cobwebbed glass, when a sound stopped him cold, a breath, soft and trembling, that was not his own. Adrian froze, every sense suddenly alert. He was alone. He was always alone. That was the bargain he had made with grief. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice harder than he intended. Silence answered him, but it was the kind of silence that held its breath, waiting. He lifted the candle higher, moving deeper into the cellar, past the wine racks toward the far wall, where the old storage alcoves had been sealed years ago. One of them stood partially open. His heart pounded as he approached. Perhaps a vagrant seeking shelter from the storm. Perhaps something worse. He had heard tales of thieves who preyed upon the estates of widowers, knowing them to be poorly guarded and distracted. Adrian steeled himself and pulled the alcove door wide. What he saw made the candle nearly slip from his grasp. A woman crouched in the corner, thin and shivering, her dark hair matted with rain and dirt. Her dress was torn and mud-stained, her feet bare and bleeding. But it was her face that stopped his breath entirely. The candlelight fell upon features he had kissed 1,000 times, eyes of deep amber that had looked at him with love on their wedding day, the delicate slope of a nose he had traced with his fingertips, lips that had spoken his name with tenderness and passion. This woman wore the face of his dead wife. "Catherine," he breathed, the name escaping before reason could catch it. The woman flinched at the sound, pressing herself further into the corner. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw with fear and exhaustion. "Please don't hurt me." The voice was wrong. Catherine's had been musical, light, full of laughter. This voice was broken, desperate and utterly unfamiliar. Adrian forced himself to breathe, to think past the shock that threatened to overwhelm him. "I won't hurt you," he managed, his voice gentler now, "but you must tell me who you are and what you're doing in my cellar." The woman's eyes, so achingly familiar yet foreign in their expression, darted toward the stairs behind him. She was calculating escape, he realized, weighing whether she could slip past him into the storm. "There's nowhere to run," he said quietly. "The storm is fierce, and you're injured. Let me help you." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Men who say such things rarely mean them. "Perhaps," Adrian acknowledged. "But you are trespassing in my home, wearing a face that haunts my dreams, and I find myself curious rather than angry. That should count for something." She studied him in the flickering candlelight, this lord in his fine clothes, holding a silver candelabra worth more than she likely possessed in her lifetime. Finally, exhaustion seemed to win over caution. "My name is Eliza," she said softly. "Eliza Hartwell. I've been running for 3 days. I saw the manor house and thought the cellar might offer shelter. I meant no harm." "Running from what?" Adrian asked, though something in her haunted expression already told him the answer. "From whom would be more accurate," Eliza replied. "From a man who believes he owns me because he married me before God and witnesses." The candlelight caught the purple bruise along her jaw, and Adrian felt a cold fury settle in his chest. Your husband, he said flatly. If he can be called such, she whispered. Thomas Hartwell, a merchant of supposed respectability. What the world sees and what exists behind closed doors are very different things, my lord. Adrian knew this truth all too well. Catherine had been the light of every ballroom, admired by all who met her. None had known of the illness that slowly consumed her from within, or of the nights he had held her as fever ravaged her body. The public face and the private truth were often strangers to one another. Come, he said, making a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. You need food, warmth, and medical attention for your feet. Eliza shrank back. I cannot. If he finds me, he won't. Adrian interrupted with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. Thornhaven is remote, and I have resources at my disposal. But you must trust me, Eliza Hartwell, at least for tonight. She searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have offered some reassurance, for she slowly extended her hand. He grasped it gently, noting how her fingers trembled in his grasp. As he helped her to her feet, the resemblance to Catherine struck him again with visceral force. In the candlelight, she could have been his wife's ghost made flesh, but when she stumbled against him, the solid warmth of her body reminded him that this was a living woman, not a spectre conjured by grief and loneliness. Can you walk? He asked. Eliza nodded, though her first step revealed the lie. She bit back a cry of pain, her weight sagging against him. Without hesitation, Adrian swept her into his arms, candle and all. My lord, I be still, he commanded, though not unkindly. Save your strength. As he carried her up the stone steps, Eliza's head rested against his shoulder, and he caught the scent of rain and fear, and something else, something that reminded him achingly of Catherine's rose perfume. But that was impossible. This woman was a stranger, no matter what trick of fate had carved her features in the image of his lost love. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, nearly dropped her lamp when Adrian emerged from the cellar with his burden. My lord, what on earth? Prepare the blue guest chamber, Adrian instructed, moving past her shocked expression. This lady requires immediate assistance. Hot water, clean linens, and fetch Dr. Morrison from the village. Tell him it's urgent. But my lord, who is she? Where did she? Now, Mrs. Pemberton, Adrian said firmly. The housekeeper had been with Thornhaven for 30 years, and knew better than to argue with that particular tone. She hurried ahead, calling for the maids with an efficiency born of decades of service. By the time Adrian reached the blue guest chamber, a fire had been lit, and servants were bringing water and linens. He laid Eliza gently upon the bed, noting how small she seemed against the fine coverlet, like a wounded bird in a nest too grand for its fragility. I'll send someone to help you, he said, starting to withdraw. Her hand shot out, grasping his sleeve with surprising strength. Thank you, she whispered, those amber eyes fixed upon his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you. Adrian looked down at her hand upon his sleeve, at the face that was and wasn't Catherine's, at this impossible woman who had stumbled into his carefully constructed solitude. Neither do I, he admitted, but here we are nonetheless. The doctor arrived within the hour, a gruff man of middle years who had attended Catherine through her final illness. He examined Eliza with professional thoroughness while Adrian paced the corridor outside, unable to explain even to himself why this stranger's welfare mattered so profoundly. When Dr. Morrison emerged, his expression was grave. She's been severely mistreated, my lord. The bruises suggest repeated violence. Her feet are badly cut from running without proper shoes. She's half-starved and suffering from exhaustion. He paused, then added quietly, there are older scars as well. This has been happening for some time. A muscle worked in Adrian's jaw. Will she recover? Physically, yes, given proper care and rest. Emotionally, the doctor shrugged. That's beyond my expertise. But she'll need time and safety to heal. She'll have both, Adrian declared. I'll leave instructions with Mrs. Pemberton. Send your bill to my solicitor. As the doctor departed, Adrian found himself drawn back to the guest chamber. Eliza lay propped against pillows, her feet bandaged, wearing one of Catherine's nightgowns that Mrs. Pemberton had found in storage. The sight of her in his wife's clothes should have felt like desecration. Instead, it felt oddly right, as if the garment had been waiting for this moment, for this woman. The doctor says you'll mend, he said from the doorway. Eliza turned her head toward him, and in the firelight, the resemblance to Catherine was less pronounced. Her face was thinner, her eyes more shadowed by experience. She was her own person, he realized, not merely a ghost's echo. Thanks to your kindness, she replied. I don't deserve such mercy from a stranger. Mercy isn't about deserving, Adrian heard himself say. It's about choosing to be human in a world that often rewards cruelty. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes. Your wife was fortunate to have such a husband. The words struck him like a physical blow. How did you? Mrs. Pemberton, Eliza explained, while she helped me bathe. She spoke of Lady Catherine with great affection. She mentioned the resemblance as well. It's remarkable, Adrian admitted, moving further into the room. In the cellar, for a moment, I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the impossible hope that had flared and died in the space of a heartbeat. I'm sorry, Eliza said softly. It must be painful, seeing a stranger wearing your wife's face. Not as painful as I would have expected, he confessed. Perhaps because you're not her, despite the resemblance. You're someone else entirely. Someone who needs help rather than haunting me. They fell into silence, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Eliza spoke again. What will happen to me now? You can't keep me here indefinitely. Thomas will be searching. Let him search, Adrian said with more confidence than he felt. Thornhaven is isolated, and my staff are loyal. You'll remain as my guest until you're strong enough to determine your own course. And then you'll decide. Stay, go, whatever you choose, but you'll choose freely, not because any man compels you. Tears welled in those amber eyes, so like Catherine's yet carrying a different pain. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for someone you don't know? Adrian considered the question, searching for truth in his own motivations. Because 3 years ago I watched someone I loved die slowly, unable to stop it or save her. Perhaps I'm trying to save someone now, even if it's too late for Catherine. That's not saving me, Eliza pointed out gently. That's trying to heal yourself. Can't it be both? He asked. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps it can, my lord. Perhaps it can. As Adrian left her to rest, he found himself returning to the cellar, to the alcove where he had discovered her. The space seemed smaller now, less ominous, merely a forgotten corner where fate had placed a woman who looked like his wife, but was someone entirely other. He thought of Catherine, of the love they had shared and lost. Would she approve of what he was doing, sheltering this stranger, risking his reputation and possibly his safety? The Catherine he remembered would have done the same without hesitation. She had possessed a kind heart and a fierce sense of justice. But Catherine was gone, and Eliza Hartwell was here, wounded and afraid, and wearing a face that would force him to confront his grief in ways he had avoided for 3 years. Whatever happened next, Adrian knew his carefully constructed solitude had been shattered. The question was whether what replaced it would be better or worse than the emptiness he had grown accustomed to. He thought of how Eliza had felt in his arms, solid and real and living. He thought of the spark of defiance he had seen beneath her fear, the strength that had kept her running for 3 days. This woman was a survivor, not a victim, despite what her husband had tried to make her. And as Adrian climbed the stairs from the cellar, leaving behind the wine he had originally sought, he realized that he no longer needed something to dull the edges of grief. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than emptiness: curiosity, purpose, and perhaps, just perhaps, the faintest stirring of hope. Morning came soft and grey to Thornhaven Manor, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Adrian stood before the window of his study, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in his hand. Sleep had eluded him, his mind turning over the improbable events of the previous evening with the persistence of a dog worrying a bone. A woman who looked like Catherine, hiding in his cellar. It seemed the premise of a Gothic novel rather than reality. Yet when he had checked on Eliza before dawn, she had been sleeping peacefully in the blue guest chamber, her breathing soft and even, proof that he had not imagined the entire encounter. "My lord?" Mrs. Pemberton's voice drew him from his reverie. "The young lady is awake, and asking for you." Adrian set down his teacup. "How does she seem?" "Frightened, my lord, though trying to hide it. She's a proud one, I think, asking if there's work she might do to earn her keep." A smile tugged at Adrian's lips, despite himself. "Tell her that guests don't work for their accommodations, but I'll come speak with her shortly." As Mrs. Pemberton departed, Adrian caught his reflection in the window glass. 3 years of grief had carved lines around his eyes and mouth, threads of silver creeping through hair that had once been uniformly dark. Catherine would scarcely recognize him, he thought. Then again, he scarcely recognized himself. He found Eliza sitting in a chair by the window of her room, still wearing Catherine's nightgown with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Someone had brushed her hair, and in the morning light, the resemblance to his wife was less pronounced. Eliza's features, while similar, held a different character, shaped by experiences Catherine had never known. "Mrs. Pemberton said you were asking about work," Adrian began without preamble. Eliza's chin lifted in a gesture of pride he found oddly endearing. "I won't be a burden, my lord. If I'm to stay, I must contribute something." "Your recovery is contribution enough," he replied, settling into the chair opposite hers. "But I appreciate the sentiment. It speaks to your character." "Character," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "I doubt character enters into it. I'm a woman who abandoned her lawful husband. The world would call me many things, but not a woman of character." "The world is often mistaken," Adrian observed, "particularly when it comes to matters it cannot see or understand." Eliza turned to look at him fully, and he saw questions forming behind those familiar yet foreign eyes. "Why are you really doing this?" "The truth, if you please, not noble platitudes about mercy or healing." He appreciated her directness, so different from the careful social dancing of the ton. "The truth," he said slowly, "is that I don't entirely know. You look like someone I lost." "Yes, but you're not her. Perhaps I'm curious. Perhaps I'm lonely. Perhaps I see in you something I failed to see in Catherine, a chance to act rather than stand helplessly by." "What happened to her?" Eliza asked softly. "Your wife." Mrs. Pemberton mentioned illness, but gave no details. Adrian found himself telling her what he had told few others, about the mysterious fever that had come and gone, sapping Catherine's strength with each recurrence, about the doctors who had prescribed useless remedies, and the priests who had offered empty consolations, about the night she had died in his arms, whispering his name with her final breath. "I'm sorry," Eliza said when he finished. "That's a terrible burden to carry." "We all carry burdens," Adrian replied. "Yours seem considerably heavier than most." She looked away toward the window where morning mist still clung to the grounds. Thomas wasn't always cruel, or perhaps he was, and I was too young and naive to see it. My father arranged the marriage. Thomas was prosperous, respectable, a good match for a merchant's daughter. "And after the wedding?" Adrian prompted gently. "After the wedding, I learned that respectability is often a mask worn in public and discarded in private." He was generous with his fists and stingy with everything else. The servants knew, but they said nothing. The neighbors suspected, but they looked away. That's what people do when the violence happens behind closed doors. Adrian felt rage kindle in his chest, cold and controlled. "How long?" "5 years," Eliza whispered. 5 years of trying to be good enough, quiet enough, obedient enough, of believing him when he said it was my fault, that I provoked him, until one night I realized that it would never end unless I made it end. "So you ran." So I ran, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the desperate hope that anything would be better than staying. I walked for 3 days, avoiding the roads, hiding when I heard hoofbeats, and then the storm came, and I saw your manor house, and I thought at least I might die warm and dry rather than cold and wet. The stark honesty of her words left Adrian momentarily without response. Finally he said, "You won't die here, Eliza. Not cold, not wet, not at all if I have anything to say about it. You can't protect me forever," she pointed out. "Thomas has resources. He'll hire men to search, and when they find me—" "If they find you," Adrian interrupted, "they'll find a woman under the protection of Lord Blackwell of Thornhaven," which should give even hired thugs pause. He leaned forward, his expression intense. "But more than that, we'll find a way to secure your freedom legally. Surely there are grounds for divorce or annulment." Eliza shook her head sadly. "The law favors husbands, my lord. A wife who leaves is seen as the transgressor, not the victim. Thomas could claim I abandoned him, and any judge would believe him over me." "Then we'll ensure they see the truth," Adrian insisted. "The bruises, the scars, your testimony. You're very optimistic for a man who just told me about watching his wife die helplessly," Eliza observed. "Perhaps grief taught me the value of fighting when you can, since there are so many battles we cannot win," he replied. Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared pain and impossible circumstances. Then Eliza smiled, a small sad thing that nevertheless transformed her face. "You're either very brave or very foolish, my lord. Can't I be both?" he asked, echoing her words from the night before. She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it pleased him. "I suppose you can, just as I can be both grateful and terrified by your kindness." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Pemberton entered with a breakfast tray, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes missed nothing, as they moved between the lord and his unexpected guest. "I've brought porridge with honey, my lord, as you instructed, and tea for the lady." "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton," Adrian said, rising. "Please inform the staff that Miss Hartwell is to be treated as an honored guest. Any needs she expresses are to be met immediately." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Miss Hartwell, my lord, not Mrs. "Miss Hartwell," Adrian confirmed with emphasis. "She is under my protection, and I expect that protection to extend throughout this household." "Of course, my lord," Mrs. Pemberton agreed, though her curious glance toward Eliza suggested questions that would never be voiced aloud. After the housekeeper departed, Eliza looked at Adrian with something like wonder. You just announced to your entire household that I'm not using my married name. They'll gossip. Let them, Adrian said dismissively. The servants here are loyal, and gossip within these walls stays within these walls. Besides, I've given them far more to talk about over the years than a guest who resembles my late wife. Does it disturb you? Eliza asked suddenly. The resemblance? Adrian considered the question honestly. At first, yes. In the cellar it was shocking. But now, he studied her face, noting the differences as much as the similarities. Now I see you, not her. You're similar, but you're not the same, and perhaps that's a gift in its own way. How so? Because it forces me to see Catherine clearly rather than through the fog of grief and idealization. She was a good woman, a kind woman, but she was also real, with flaws and fears like anyone else. You remind me of that. Eliza picked at the coverlet, her fingers tracing the embroidered pattern. I'm glad I can give you something, even if it's only that. You give me more than you know, Adrian said quietly. You give me purpose. For 3 years I've drifted through days like a ghost in my own home. Yesterday, carrying you up from the cellar, I felt alive for the first time since Catherine died. Her eyes widened slightly. That's a heavy thing to lay upon a stranger, my lord. Then perhaps we should stop being strangers, he suggested. You're Eliza, and I'm Adrian. Can we agree to that much, at least while you're under this roof? She tested his name silently on her lips before speaking it aloud. Adrian, the sound of it seemed to please her. Very well, Adrian, though I warn you I'm not good at being saved. I've spent too long saving myself to know how to accept help gracefully. Then we'll learn together, he replied, because I'm not good at saving people. I've spent too long failing at it. They shared a smile, tentative and uncertain, two wounded souls finding unexpected common ground. Outside, the morning mist began to lift, revealing the grounds of Thornhaven in all their autumn glory. Inside, something equally transformative was beginning, though neither could yet name what it might become. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Eliza's feet healed slowly, keeping her confined to the upper floors of Thornhaven Manor. Adrian found himself spending more time in her company than strict propriety would permit, though he told himself it was simply ensuring his guests' comfort and safety. They played chess in the afternoons, her skill surprising him. They discussed books from his library, her opinions sharp and insightful. They shared meals in the small dining room rather than the formal hall, conversation flowing with increasing ease as the barriers of strangerhood fell away. Mrs. Pemberton watched these developments with the concern of one who had served the family for decades, and felt entitled to certain opinions about her lord's behavior. She cornered Adrian one morning in his study, her expression determined. "My lord, if I may speak plainly." "You usually do regardless of permission, Mrs. Pemberton," Adrian replied with a smile. "What troubles you?" "The young lady," the housekeeper began carefully. "The staff are beginning to talk, my lord, about the resemblance, about her extended stay, about how much time you spend in her company." Adrian set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "What exactly are they saying?" "That she's a ghost made flesh. That she's bewitched you. That she's Catherine's spirit come back to claim what was left unfinished." The housekeeper paused, or worse, that she's an impostor seeking to take advantage of your grief. "And what do you think, Mrs. Pemberton?" Adrian asked. The older woman studied him with eyes that had watched him grow from boy to man. "I think she's a frightened young woman who stumbled into something beyond her control, and I think you're a lonely man who sees in her a chance at something he thought lost forever." "That's rather poetic for someone who usually speaks in practicalities," Adrian observed. "I'm old, my lord, not dead. I have eyes to see and a heart that still remembers what it feels like to hope." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "But I also remember what happened after Lady Catherine died. How you shut yourself away, refusing visitors, refusing to rejoin the world. Miss Eliza's presence has brought you back to life, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm also concerned about what happens when reality intrudes, as it inevitably will." Adrian knew she was right. He had been living in a strange bubble these past days, focusing entirely on Eliza's recovery and their growing friendship, as if the outside world didn't exist. But Thomas Hartwell did exist, and eventually he would track his wife to Thornhaven. "I'm aware of the complications," Adrian assured her, "and I'm prepared to face them when they arrive." "Are you prepared to face your own heart, my lord?" Mrs. Pemberton asked gently. "That's often the most difficult confrontation of all." Before Adrian could respond, raised voices from the front hall interrupted them. He exchanged a glance with the housekeeper, then strode quickly toward the commotion. He arrived to find his butler, Harrison, barring the door against a florid-faced man of middle years, well-dressed, but with the cruel set to his mouth that spoke of a harsh disposition. Behind him stood two rough-looking individuals who were clearly hired muscle rather than gentlemen. "I don't care what your master says," the man was snarling at Harrison. "I have every right to search this property. My wife is missing, and I have reason to believe she's taken refuge here." "Mr. Hartwell, I presume," Adrian said coldly, descending the stairs with measured steps. All eyes turned toward him, taking in his aristocratic bearing and the barely controlled anger in his expression. Thomas Hartwell's eyes narrowed as he assessed Adrian. "Lord Blackwell, I'm Thomas Hartwell, merchant of London. My wife, Eliza, has been missing for 5 days. I've been told by locals that a woman matching her description was seen near your estate." "And if she was?" Adrian asked, his voice dangerously soft. "What business is it of yours to search my home without warrant or invitation?" "She's my wife," Thomas said, as if that explained everything. "What a man does to retrieve his own property is hardly subject to scrutiny." "Property," Adrian repeated, the word like ice. "You speak of a woman, sir, not a horse or a piece of furniture." "In the eyes of the law, she is mine," Thomas replied with a cruel smile. "Bought and paid for through proper marriage, and I mean to have her back, along with appropriate compensation for the trouble she's caused." Adrian descended the final steps until he stood face to face with Thomas Hartwell. "Let me make something perfectly clear. If a woman resembling your description is indeed under my roof, she is there as my guest and under my protection. You will not search my home. You will not make demands. You will remove yourself from my property immediately, or I shall have you removed." Thomas's face reddened further. "You can't keep a man from his legal wife, my lord. That's against the law itself." "Is it against the law to offer sanctuary to someone fleeing violence?" Adrian countered, "Because if this woman is here, and I'm not confirming that she is, it would be because she feared for her life. Would you care to explain to a magistrate why your wife would feel such fear?" "Whatever lies she's told you—" "I've heard no lies," Adrian interrupted, "but I've seen evidence that would be most interesting to authorities should this matter escalate beyond a domestic dispute." The two men stared at each other, wills locked in silent combat. Finally, Thomas stepped back slightly, though his expression remained venomous. "This isn't over, Lord Blackwell. I have resources and rights. I'll return with proper authority." "You do that," Adrian agreed coldly. "And I'll ensure that proper authority sees all the evidence, including medical documentation of injuries sustained by a woman under my protection. We'll let the law decide whose rights supersede whose." Thomas Hartwell's eyes promised retribution, but he jerked his head at his men and turned toward the door. Before departing, he paused to deliver one final threat. "She'll always be my wife, my lord. Legal and binding. Whatever you think you're doing here, it ends with her coming home where she belongs." "Get out," Adrian said quietly, and something in his tone made even Thomas Hartwell's hired thugs take a step back. After they departed, Adrian stood in the silence of the hall, his hands trembling with suppressed fury. Harrison cleared his throat delicately. "That could have gone better, my lord." "Or much worse," Adrian replied. "Send word to my solicitor in London. I need him here within 2 days, and double the watch on the grounds. If Hartwell returns, I want to know before he reaches the front door." "Yes, my lord. And Miss Eliza? Tell her nothing for now. She's been frightened enough. Let her have one more night of peace before reality crashes down upon us." But Eliza had heard everything. From her position at the top of the stairs, she had witnessed the entire confrontation, her face pale and her hands gripping the banister until her knuckles turned white. As Adrian climbed toward his study, he found her there, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I've brought this upon your house. I should leave before he returns with authorities." Adrian reached for her hands, holding them firmly in his own. "You're not going anywhere. Do you understand? I didn't face down that brute to simply hand you over at the first threat." "But he's right," Eliza said miserably. "I am his wife in the eyes of the law. You can't change that, no matter how much you might wish to." "The law is not immutable," Adrian insisted. "There are provisions for divorce, for legal separation, for protection from spousal violence. My solicitor will know the options." "And if there are no options?" she asked. "What then? You can't keep me here forever, and I won't hide while you face consequences for my choices." Adrian looked at her, this woman who wore his wife's face but possessed her own fierce spirit, and felt something shift in his chest. It was more than compassion, more than the need to right a wrong. It was something deeper and more frightening in its implications. "Then we'll face those consequences together," he said quietly. "You and I, because you're not alone anymore, Eliza. You have me, and I have resources that Thomas Hartwell cannot match." She searched his face, looking for certainty or perhaps doubt. "Why? Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know?" "Because," Adrian said, the truth emerging before he could stop it, "you remind me that life continues even after loss, that there are still battles worth fighting, even if we can't win them all, and because when I look at you I don't just see Catherine's ghost. I see someone who makes me want to stop being a ghost myself." The confession hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Finally, Eliza rose on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you, Adrian. Whatever happens, thank you for giving me these days of safety and peace. They're more than I've known in 5 years." As she withdrew to her chamber, Adrian touched his cheek where her lips had brushed, feeling the warmth linger like a benediction. Outside, storm clouds gathered once more over Thornhaven Manor, but inside, something else was gathering as well. Something that felt remarkably like hope. Adrian's solicitor, Mr. Bartholomew Finch, arrived the following afternoon, a thin man of advancing years with shrewd eyes and a reputation for navigating complex legal waters. Adrian met with him in private, laying out the situation with blunt honesty. Finch listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in his leather portfolio. "It's a complicated matter, my lord," Finch said, when Adrian finished. "English law heavily favors the husband in matrimonial disputes. Mrs. Hartwell's best legal recourse would be a suit for divorce on grounds of cruelty, but such proceedings are costly, time-consuming, and require substantial proof." "We have proof," Adrian said. "Dr. Morrison documented her injuries. I witnessed her condition when she arrived. Her testimony itself would be compelling. Testimony from a wife against her husband is often viewed with skepticism, Finch replied gently, particularly when that wife has acknowledged leaving the marital home. The court could interpret her flight as abandonment rather than self-preservation. Adrian felt frustration rising. So the law offers no protection to a woman fleeing violence? It offers limited protection, Finch clarified, but it requires navigating a system designed largely by and for men. However, he added, seeing Adrian's expression, there may be alternative approaches. Tell me, has Mr. Hartwell any vulnerabilities we might exploit? Debts, scandals, business improprieties? I know nothing of the man beyond his treatment of his wife, Adrian admitted. Then perhaps we should learn more. I'll engage an investigator in London to examine Mr. Hartwell's affairs. Often, men who are violent in private are equally careless in their business dealings. If we can find leverage, we can negotiate from a position of strength. Negotiate what? An agreement. Mr. Hartwell allows a quiet separation, makes no further claims upon his wife, and in return, we don't expose whatever unsavory details we uncover about his business practices. It's not ideal, but it may be more practical than a lengthy court battle. Adrian considered this. How long would such an investigation take? Several weeks at minimum. Can you guarantee Mrs. Hartwell's safety here during that period? I can and will, Adrian replied firmly. Excellent. Then I'll begin immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you obtain Mrs. Hartwell's formal statement regarding her treatment. Detailed accounts, specific dates, if she can remember them, witnesses, if any exist. The more documentation we have, the stronger our position. After Finch departed, Adrian sought out Eliza. He found her in the library, curled in a chair by the fire with one of Catherine's favorite books. The sight should have pained him, but instead, it felt right, as if the library had been waiting for someone to bring it back to life. We need to talk, he said gently, settling into the chair opposite hers. Eliza set the book aside, her expression wary. That's never a promising beginning. Adrian explained Finch's plan, watching her face shift through hopes, skepticism, and finally a weary resignation. You're saying that even with proof, even with testimony, the best we can hope for is finding something to blackmail Thomas with. Not blackmail, Adrian corrected. Leverage. It's not justice, I'll grant you, but it may be freedom. Isn't that what you want? Of course it is, Eliza said quietly. But I hate that we have to play these games, that the truth of what he did isn't enough on its own. I hate it too, Adrian admitted, but we work with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Then Eliza spoke again, her voice small. What happens if we fail? If we find no leverage, if the law sides with Thomas? Then we find another way, Adrian said with more confidence than he felt. We could leave England. The continent offers opportunities for those seeking to escape English law. Eliza's eyes widened. You would do that? Leave your home, your position, everything for me? I would do many things for you, Adrian said quietly. Things that surprise me as much as they likely surprise you. She rose from her chair and moved to stand before him, her amber eyes searching his face. Why, Adrian? I need to understand why you would risk so much. He reached for her hand, tracing the faint scar across her knuckles with his thumb. Because when I found you in the cellar, I saw someone fighting to survive, and it reminded me that I've been merely surviving too, not living. You make me want to live again, Eliza. That's worth fighting for. Tears welled in her eyes. You barely know me. I know enough, he replied. I know you're brave and stubborn and kind, despite everything you've endured. I know that when you laugh, which you do far too seldom, it lights something inside me that I thought had died with Catherine. I know that I look forward to our mornings together, to hearing your thoughts and seeing your smile. Is that enough knowledge to act upon? Perhaps not, but it's what I have, and it feels like more than I've had in 3 years. I look like her, Eliza whispered. Is that part of it? Am I a replacement for what you lost? Adrian had known this question would come eventually. He answered with careful honesty. At first, yes. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. But now, he cupped her face gently in his hands. Now, when I look at you, I see, Eliza, your courage, your wit, your strength. You're not Catherine, and I don't want you to be. I want you to be exactly who you are. A sob escaped her throat, and she leaned into his touch. I'm damaged, Adrian. Thomas broke things inside me that may never heal. I don't know if I can be what you deserve. You are not broken, he said fiercely. Wounded, yes. Scarred, certainly, but not broken, and I don't want you to be anything other than yourself, wounds and all. She kissed him then, softly at first, then with growing intensity as 3 years of loneliness met 5 years of pain, and both sought solace in human connection. Adrian responded carefully, mindful of her trauma, letting her set the pace and depth of their intimacy. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, foreheads pressed together. That probably wasn't wise, Eliza said with a shaky laugh. Probably not, Adrian agreed, but I find I don't care much for wisdom at the moment. What are we doing, Adrian? She asked. What is this between us? I don't know, he admitted. But I'd like the chance to find out, if you're willing. She nodded slowly. I'm willing. Terrified, but willing. Then that's enough for now, he said. We'll take each day as it comes and see where it leads us. What neither of them knew was that Thomas Hartwell had not retreated to London, as expected. Instead, he had taken rooms at the village inn, nursing his fury and plotting his next move. He had seen the way Lord Blackwell looked at his wife, the protective stance, the barely controlled anger. The aristocrat fancied himself Eliza's rescuer, perhaps even her lover. Well, Thomas thought darkly, staring into his whiskey glass, we'll see how noble Lord Blackwell feels when I bring scandal down upon his head. A man of his position couldn't afford rumors of adultery, of stealing another man's wife. The ton would eat him alive, title and lands notwithstanding. He would get Eliza back, and he would make her pay for every moment of trouble she had caused. As for Lord Blackwell, well, there were ways to hurt a man beyond physical violence. Thomas smiled into his drink, already composing the letters he would send to certain influential people in London. By the time he was finished, the high and mighty Lord Blackwell would regret ever interfering in Thomas Hartwell's affairs. 3 weeks passed at Thornhaven Manor in a strange state of suspended reality. Adrian and Eliza grew closer each day, their connection deepening from friendship into something neither was quite ready to name aloud. They walked the autumn grounds together, her feet finally healed enough for gentle exercise. They played music in the evening, his fumbling piano accompanying her surprisingly lovely voice. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, filling the manor with a warmth it hadn't known since Catherine's death. Mrs. Pemberton watched with mixed feelings, happy to see her lord engaged with life again, but worried about the inevitable confrontation that must come. The servants whispered about the resemblance between the new lady and the old, about the way Lord Blackwell looked at Miss Eliza, about what it all might mean. In London, Mr. Finch's investigator was having remarkable success. Thomas Hartwell, it seemed, had been less careful in his business dealings than in maintaining his public reputation. There were debts hidden from creditors, partnerships dissolved under questionable circumstances, and most damning of all, evidence of fraudulent dealings in textile imports that could see him facing criminal charges if brought to light. Finch compiled his findings into a comprehensive report and returned to Thornhaven with barely suppressed satisfaction. "We have him, my lord," the solicitor announced, spreading documents across Adrian's desk. "Enough to see him ruined if he doesn't cooperate. I took the liberty of having our investigator make copies of these documents and place them with trusted individuals. Should anything happen to us, the information will be delivered to the appropriate authorities." Adrian studied the papers with grim satisfaction. "It's more than I hoped for. When do we approach him?" "Soon. But first we must consider how to structure the separation. Mrs. Hartwell will need financial support, legal protection, and a new identity if she's to have any hope of building a life free from her husband's reach." "I'll provide whatever she needs," Adrian said immediately. Finch regarded him with the frank assessment of one who had served the family for decades. "My lord, forgive my impertinence, but you are aware of how this situation appears, the resemblance to Lady Catherine, the woman living under your roof, the time you spend together, the gossip, if it reaches London, could be damaging." "Let it be damaging," Adrian said dismissively. "I've spent 3 years in isolation, caring nothing for society's opinion. Why should I start now?" "Because you care for Mrs. Hartwell," Finch replied gently, "and scandal would attach to her as much as to you, perhaps more, given her vulnerable position." The solicitor was right, Adrian knew. But the thought of sending Eliza away, even to protect her reputation, was unbearable. "What do you suggest?" "Discretion, my lord. We arrange the separation, establish Mrs. Hartwell in a safe location under an assumed name, and you maintain proper distance until enough time has passed for the matter to be forgotten." "How much time?" "A year at least." "Perhaps longer." "A year. It might as well have been a decade." But Adrian recognized the wisdom in Finch's counsel. "Let's settle the matter with Hartwell first, then we'll discuss what comes after." They sent word to Thomas Hartwell through intermediaries, requesting a meeting at Thornhaven to discuss the situation. Thomas arrived 3 days later, his expression smug, as he was shown into Adrian's study. "Changed your mind about harboring my wife, my lord?" he asked, settling into a chair without invitation. "Not precisely," Adrian replied coolly, "but I believe we can reach an accommodation that serves everyone's interests." He nodded to Finch, who began laying out documents with methodical precision. As Thomas reviewed the evidence of his fraudulent dealings, his smugness faded into something approaching panic. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "That's irrelevant," Finch replied. "What matters is that we have them, along with copies distributed to various locations. Should anything unfortunate happen to Mrs. Hartwell or to Lord Blackwell, these documents will be delivered to the authorities within days." Thomas's face had gone pale. "You're blackmailing me?" "We're offering you a choice," Adrian corrected. "You can agree to a legal separation, relinquish all claims to your wife, and walk away with your reputation and freedom intact. Or we can allow the authorities to investigate your business practices and let the consequences fall where they may." "You can't do this," Thomas sputtered. "She's my wife. The law also frowns on fraud," Finch interrupted, "particularly fraud of this magnitude. I believe the penalty could include imprisonment, seizure of assets, and permanent ruin. Compared to that, losing a wife who clearly despises you seems a minor inconvenience." Thomas sat in furious silence, his hands clenching and unclenching. Finally, he spat out, "What exactly are you proposing?" Finch outlined the terms with professional precision: a legal separation on grounds of mutual consent, financial settlement sufficient for Eliza to live independently, and a binding agreement that Thomas would make no further contact with her under penalty of having the evidence released. "And if I refuse?" Thomas asked. "Then we proceed to court," Adrian said flatly. "And I will spare no expense, ensuring that every detail of your treatment of Eliza becomes public record. The bruises, the scars, the fear, you'll be revealed as exactly the kind of man you are, and society's judgment will be far harsher than any legal penalty." Thomas knew he was beaten, his face twisted with impotent rage, but he signed the documents Finch placed before him, each stroke of the pen an admission of defeat. "She'll never escape me," he muttered as he prepared to leave. "She'll always carry the mark of being my wife, my cast-off property. She'll carry the mark of being a survivor," Adrian replied coldly, "which is infinitely more honorable than what you'll carry. The knowledge that you were bested by a woman brave enough to run and a man honorable enough to help her. Now get out of my house and consider yourself fortunate that I'm allowing you to leave with your freedom intact." After Thomas departed, escorted firmly from the grounds by Adrian's men, Finch gathered his papers with satisfaction. That went better than expected. He could have fought harder. "He's a coward," Adrian said. "Cowards only fight when they believe they can win. Once we showed him he couldn't, he had no choice but to surrender." They found Eliza in the library, where she had been waiting throughout the entire confrontation. Her face was pale but composed, and when Adrian entered, she rose on unsteady legs. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done," Adrian confirmed. "You're free, Eliza, legally separated with an agreement that protects you from any future claims." A shudder ran through her body, relief and disbelief warring for dominance. Then her knees buckled, and Adrian caught her before she could fall, gathering her close as great racking sobs shook her frame. "I'm free," she whispered between tears. "After 5 years, I'm finally free." "You're free," Adrian confirmed, holding her as she wept, stroking her hair and murmuring wordless comfort. Mr. Finch discreetly withdrew, closing the library door behind him to give them privacy. Eventually, Eliza's tears subsided, leaving her exhausted but lighter somehow, as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She pulled back slightly to look at Adrian's face, memorizing its features. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide what you want," Adrian replied. "Where you want to go, how you want to live. You're free to choose, Eliza, truly free." "And if what I want is to stay here?" she asked tentatively. "With you?" Adrian's heart clenched. He thought of Finch's advice, of the need for discretion and distance. He thought of what society would say about a widower and his late wife's look-alike living under the same roof. Then he thought of how empty Thornhaven had been before she arrived, and how full it felt now. "Then you stay," he said simply. "Society can think what it likes. I've paid my dues to propriety and found it a poor bargain. If you want to be here, then this is where you belong." She searched his face. "You would brave scandal for me, risk your reputation?" "I would brave far worse," Adrian assured her. "You've given me back something I thought lost forever, Eliza. The will to live fully, to feel deeply, to hope for more than just enduring until death. That's worth any price society might demand." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I love you, Adrian Blackwell, for your kindness and your courage, and the way you see me as whole rather than broken."
"I love you too," he replied,
the words emerging easily despite 3 years of emotional silence. "Not because you look like Catherine, but because you're nothing like her. You're fierce where she was gentle, determined where she was compliant, a survivor where she was fragile. You're yourself, Eliza, and that's exactly who I love." They kissed then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Outside, autumn was giving way to winter, the first snow beginning to dust the grounds of Thornhaven Manor. But inside, spring had finally come after 3 long years of frozen grief. When they finally parted, Eliza asked the question that had haunted her since the night Adrian found her. "Do you think she would mind, Catherine, that you found someone who looks like her but isn't her?" Adrian considered this seriously. "I think Catherine, who was kind and generous, would be glad that I've found a reason to live again, and I think she would like you, Eliza. You have strengths she lacked, and you survived things she never had to face. There's no competition between you, no comparison. You're simply different people who happened to cross my path at different times." "That's a generous way to view it," Eliza observed. "It's an honest way," Adrian corrected. "Catherine was my past, and I'll always cherish what we had. But you're my present, and if you'll have me, my future. There's room in a heart for both love remembered and love newly found." Eliza leaned into his embrace, feeling safe for the first time in years. "Then yes," she said softly. "Yes, I'll have you, for as long as you'll have me. Forever then," Adrian replied, and for the first time since Catherine's death, the word didn't fill him with sorrow but with anticipation. The months that followed brought their own challenges. News of Lord Blackwell's unusual house guest did eventually reach London, and the gossip was as unkind as expected. Some called Eliza a ghost made flesh, others an opportunist trading on resemblance, still others whispered darker things about adultery and impropriety and the shocking scandal of a peer sheltering another man's wife. But Adrian and Eliza faced the whispers together, presenting a united front to the world. Gradually, the town found new scandals to occupy their attention, and Thornhaven Manor's unusual inhabitants were left in relative peace. Eliza bloomed like a flower finally given sunlight and water. Free from fear and violence, her true nature emerged, witty and warm and surprisingly confident. She took over management of the household with Mrs. Pemberton's guidance, bringing life and laughter to rooms that had been silent for too long. She worked in the gardens, redesigned the library, and began writing letters to her estranged family, cautiously rebuilding bridges burned by her marriage to Thomas. Adrian found himself transformed as well. The grief that had consumed him for 3 years remained, but it no longer defined him. He could speak of Catherine with fondness rather than pain, could remember the good without being overwhelmed by the loss, and slowly, tentatively, he began to re-engage with the world, accepting social invitations and resuming his seat in the House of Lords. 1 year after finding Eliza in his cellar, Adrian proposed marriage properly, with a ring and a formal request, and all the tradition he had skipped the first time. Eliza accepted, tears streaming down her face, and they were wed in the small chapel on the Thornhaven grounds, with only close friends and loyal servants in attendance. There were those who called it scandalous, a widower marrying his late wife's doppelganger barely 3 years after her death. But those who knew the truth, who saw how Adrian looked at Eliza and how she bloomed under his regard, understood that this was not the story of a man clinging to the past, but of 2 people helping each other build a future. On their wedding night, as they stood together in the same chamber where Adrian had first carried Eliza after finding her in the cellar, she turned to him with a smile that was entirely her own. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Finding me that night, taking me in when you could have turned me away?" Adrian pulled her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "I regret nothing," he said firmly. "Finding you was the greatest gift grief could have given me, proof that life continues, that hope survives, that love can be found in the most unlikely places. Even in a cellar," Eliza said with a laugh. "Especially in a cellar," Adrian agreed, though I don't recommend it as a reliable method for meeting one's future spouse. They laughed together, the sound filling the room with warmth and promise. Outside, stars emerged in the clear night sky, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out to its mate. Inside Thornhaven Manor, two souls who had found each other in darkness were finally blessedly home. 5 years later, a different woman stood in the portrait gallery of Thornhaven Manor, studying two paintings that hung side by side. On the left, Lady Catherine Blackwell, in her wedding gown, beautiful and serene, captured in oil at the height of her brief life. On the right, Lady Eliza Blackwell, painted in the same style but holding an open book rather than flowers, her expression confident and knowing. The resemblance between the two women was still remarkable, though time and happiness had softened Eliza's features, erasing the sharp edges that fear and pain had carved. They could have been sisters, these two ladies of Thornhaven, connected not by blood, but by the man who had loved them both, each in their own time, each in their own way. Adrian joined her in the gallery, their young daughter balanced on his hip. Little Catherine, named for the wife he had lost, had her mother Eliza's amber eyes, but her namesake's gentle disposition. She babbled happily, reaching for the portraits with chubby hands. "Pretty ladies," she announced with the certainty of a 3-year-old, "Mama and Auntie Cat." It was what they had taught her to call the portrait of Catherine, a way of honoring the past without confusing the child's understanding of her family. "Very pretty," Eliza agreed, taking her daughter from Adrian's arms. "Auntie Cat would have loved to meet you, little one. She had a kind heart, like Mama," Catherine declared firmly. And Eliza laughed. "Your daughter has excellent judgment," Adrian observed, sliding his arm around Eliza's waist. "She clearly inherits her intelligence from your side of the family." "Flatterer," Eliza accused, but she leaned into his embrace. "You ever wonder what Catherine would think of all this, of us, of our life together?" Adrian considered the question, looking at the portrait of his first wife. Her painted eyes seemed to look back with understanding rather than accusation. "I think she would be glad," he said finally. "Glad that I didn't spend my life mourning, glad that I found love again, glad that her memory hasn't been erased but honored alongside new joy." "That's a generous interpretation," Eliza said softly. "It's the only one that makes sense," Adrian replied. "Love doesn't diminish with division. I loved Catherine. I love you. Both are true, and neither negates the other." Young Catherine squirmed in her mother's arms, ready to move on to more exciting pursuits than standing still in a portrait gallery. They released her to toddle off under the watchful eye of her nursemaid, and Adrian and Eliza followed more slowly, hand in hand. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked, echoing Eliza's question from their wedding night. "Coming to Thornhaven? Knocking on fate's door?" Eliza squeezed his hand. "How could I regret the best thing that ever happened to me? Yes, I was running from horror. Yes, I was terrified, but I ran straight into love, and that makes every difficult moment worthwhile." They passed through the manor house, rooms that had once echoed with loneliness now filled with the sounds of family and life. The cellar where their story had begun remained below, dark and quiet, a forgotten space that neither had reason to visit anymore. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the fire burned low and the world felt particularly peaceful, Adrian would tell the story of finding a woman hiding in his cellar, a woman whose face looked exactly like his late wife's, and Eliza would add her own perspective of being terrified and desperate and stumbling into an impossible sanctuary. Their daughter would grow up hearing this story, would come to understand that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. That resemblance is not replacement, that new love doesn't erase old love, and that the human heart has an infinite capacity for healing and hope if we're brave enough to let it. And in the portrait gallery, two ladies would continue to watch over Thornhaven Manor. Catherine, who had been loved and lost too soon, and Eliza, who had been found and loved in the aftermath of grief. Different women, different loves, but both essential to the story of a man who learned that the end of one chapter doesn't mean the end of the book itself. Did this story touch your heart? If you believe in second chances and love that heals, share this tale with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us which moment moved you most. Was it when Adrian first found Eliza in the cellar, when he confronted Thomas Hartwell, or perhaps their wedding in the chapel? Your comments help us create more stories that remind us all that even in our darkest moments, hope can find us. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys through love, loss, and the courage to begin again. Stay until the end. Another beautiful story awaits you.